So this is a song that taught me the importance of secondary dominance, and I'll share that important theory with you today, as well as show you the chords and break down the harmony for you. In the video description, you'll find a link to the PDFs from today, as well as the link to my Patreon page, where this month there's a chord melody for all of me, there's a Freddie Green style comping study, there's a beginner solo, there's an intermediate solo, and a chord tone outline. With all that out of the way, let's get on to All of Me. All of Me is typically played in the key of C, a great key for understanding and looking at theory. It's a 32 bar standard with A-B form, each section being 16 bars. Now, why is this a great song to learn about secondary dominance, and what are secondary dominants? Now, in a key like C, we have one dominant chord, what I like to call the primary dominant. In the key of C, that would be the 5 chord G7. And we get that 5 chord, that G7, by taking the C major scale and building a chord of each scale degree, giving us the following 7 chords. The G7 is the only dominant 7th chord in those 7 chords, hence why we call it the primary dominant. So if we've got a standard, any other dominant chord that comes in would be classified as a secondary dominant, as it's secondary in addition to the primary one. If we take a peek at the chart for All of Me, we can see that G7, that primary dominant, occurs a few times, but so does E7, so does A7, and so does D7. And so those 3 are secondary dominants. G7's our primary dominant in this song, and those other 3, E, A, and D7, are secondary dominants. Now, I feel that every dominant chord has a very strong function in that it wants to lead us somewhere. So the purpose of G7 in the key of C is to lead us back to C, back to the 1 chord. As you can see, it happens here and again, and at the end to help us go back to the C at the beginning. Now, just like G7 is the dominant of C, every dominant chord has a dominant chord that can take you to that chord. Now, the circle of fifths is a great reference for this. Here it is on the screen. Look where C is there at 12 o'clock. Go clockwise and we've got G next to it. So if you're thinking of C as chord 1, the 5 chord in the circle of fifths will be to the right. And this will work all the way round. So if we took, let's take A, the 5 of A is E. If we took D, the 5 of D is A. And if we took G as our 1, the 5 of G is D. And that would work all the way around the circle going clockwise. And going back to All of Me, let's take those secondary dominants, E7, A7, D7. And looking at the chart, E7, here it leads to A. And again, A7 leads to D. And D7 works its way to G, albeit via D minor 7 too. But that's a common thing. So we can see there how those secondary dominants behave. They want to take us somewhere and they want to lead us somewhere. And it's always like when you're learning a standard and listening to music, kind of feeling that journey that chords take us. They take us either to points of rest or to points again of further movement. And in All of Me, as soon as we hit that E7, we're on a journey. Now, there's 2 ways we can label dominant chords that I should make you aware of. First off, let's say we've got an E7. Now, in the key of C, like in All of Me, chord 3 is an E, but it's E minor or E minor 7. Now, one way we could label that is we could call it 3-7 with capital I's, like this. Also point out, this is where you hear people say the 5 of 2, the 5 of 6, the 5 of 3. What does that mean? Well, it means if you're in the key of C, well, G7's a 5 of 1. But what if I wanted to play the dominant for the 2 chord? Well, I need an A7. So A7 is the 5 of 2. If we wanted to play the 5 of the 3 chord, E minor, we'd need a B7 because that's the dominant of that. So B7 is the 5 of E minor of 3. F, chord 4, C7 is the 5 of 4. G7, D7 is the 5 of 5. And then for chord 6, you've got E7 being the 5 of 6. So that's where that terminology, 5 of whatever chord, comes in. So out of the secondary dominants we've got in All of Me, E7, A7 and D7, E7, that's the 5 of 6 because E7 leads you to A. And you could call A7 the 5 of 2 because A7 will lead you to D. chord 2. And you could chord D7 the 5 of 5 because D is the dominant of G and it will lead you there. So there's two different ways we can label them, and I think it's important for me to say that because you will encounter both ways and it might confuse you. Now the final thing I'd like to say about secondary dominance, and this doesn't apply to all of me, is that there are really two types. There are functional and non-functional. Now the ones in all of me would classify as functional, and that is they go to where you'd expect. Take E7, E being the 5 of A, it leads to A7, it leads to A minor later on, goes EA. But if you had E7 going to, I don't know, a D minor chord, or E7 going to F, now that would be a non-functional secondary dominant because it doesn't lead you to its usual destination of A. Now with that theory covered, let's look at the song, and hopefully that will help your understanding of how the chords are working and how you hear the chords too. So here's the chord shapes you're going to need close up. C6, E7, A7, D minor 7, A minor 7, D7, G7, F6 9, F minor 6. You may recognize that as D minor 7 flat 5. Those chords contain the same note, so that can double up as F minor 6, albeit with the 6th in the bass. C/E. If you find that chord tricky, you could just play C6 instead of that. E flat diminish. And C6 9. So just reminding ourselves of what the chords in the key of C are. Chord 1, C major 7, although it could be voiced as a C6 or a C6 9. D minor 7, chord 2. E minor 7, chord 3. F major 7, chord 4, and that could be voiced as F6 or even F6 9, as we get in this song. G7, chord 5. A minor 7, chord 6. B minor 7 flat 5, chord 7. Back to our 1 chord. So we start out on the 1 chord, move to the 3 chord as a dominant, E7, then the 6 chord as a dominant, which leads us to the 2, D minor 7. Pick E7 up again, 2 bars, to the 6 chord, A minor, to D7 chord 2 as a dominant, to D minor 7 the 2 is minor, to G7 the 5 chord. So just looking there, apart from the last 2 bars, every chord's getting 2 bars. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's what we feel is the harmonic rhythm of this song, that chord's getting 2 bars, certainly for this section anyway. Starting out from the stable point of chord 1, and then that secondary dominant, that E7 when it comes in, we're going somewhere, and because we're so used to hearing it, it wants to go to an A bass chord, and it goes to A7, which is the dominant of D minor, so it leads us perfectly there to the 2 chord, D minor 7. So the E7 chord comes back in again, leading us again to an A bass chord, but this time minor. And then as soon as this D7 comes in, we're working our way back. And we need to get to G7. And D7 is the dominant of G7, the 5 of 5, but we're going to get there via making it a minor, D minor, then G7. The primary dominant will help us kick off the B section, which starts with a C6 chord. So as we can hear there and see there, the dominance, that chord is taking us on a journey, this E7. So is the D minor. We get a little bit of respite on this D minor, feels a bit more restful. E7 comes back in, where are we going? To A minor, everything's sort of shifting. D7, and then the predictable 2, 5, leading us to the B section. Here's the B section on the screen, and I'll just play it through for you and talk through it, starting out on the 1 chord again, because the D minor 7 G7 at the end of the A section has perfectly led us here. 2 bars of the 1 chord, C6, E7, so chord 3 is a dominant, a secondary dominant leading to A7, the 6-7 leading to the 2 chord because it's the dominant of that, D minor 7. So that first bit I should point out is the same as the start of the A section, so C6, E7, A7, D minor. And again, everything's getting 2 bars. Often at the end of the form, things get busier. It's quite often the case, or the composer reserves harmony they've not yet used for interest and to build at the end, and that happens here definitely. So there we go to F6 line, chord 4, and then chord 4 as a minor, minor 6, F minor 6, and that's a really common thing in music, to go from major to minor with chord 4. Listen to that. It's a really sad, emotive movement. Nice chord to it. Back to chord 1, C6, to the secondary dominant, A7, D minor 7, chord 2, G7, chord 5, and then we've got like a turnaround here, and you could do lots of different things here. Here's just something I like to do, which is C/E, E flat diminished, falling down to D minor 7, chord 2, G7, chord 5, and that would help us either go back to the beginning to play C6 again, or if you're finishing the song, I like to finish on C6 line, because that's a very sweet sound, nice to let it ring out too. Let's play that again. So 1 chord, moving to a secondary dominant, E7. So the 3 chord is a dominant, leading us to A7. The 6th chord is a dominant, leading to 2, D minor. And then, like a blues, moving to the 4 chord here, to 4 minor, 1. 6 is a dominant, which leads to D minor, which leads to G7, which is the 5, and then the turnaround. And that turnaround is, chord 1, C/E, but that's as a that's got the 3rd in the bass. E is the 3rd of a C chord, so it's a C chord with the 3rd in the bass, first inversion. To E flat diminished. This is known as the flat 3 diminished. Why? Because the 3rd chord, as we know, in C is usually E minor, or an E bass chord. So if you flatten that 3, you'd get the note E flat, build a diminished off it, and it leads beautifully to the 2, D minor 7, pick up a 5, we get the 2, 5, 1 to finish, or go back to the beginning. Now, a couple big takeaways that I think are important, especially if secondary dominants are new to you, and that is the fact that, say, E7, it will often lead to an A bass chord. That's where you expect it to go, and you look at other standards and you're likely to see that happening again and again. Same goes for D7, leads to G7, and A7 leading to D minor or D7. And these are things, if you play songs from a point of understanding them and thinking about the way the chords sound, the function of the chords, and the way they want to move and the way they want to go. Obviously, a composer doesn't always fulfill our expectations, but those secondary dominants, it's often the case that they lead to where you expect. And for me, as soon as I see E7 on a chart or hear it, I'm thinking of what's coming next, and kind of pre-hearing it, I'm expecting an A bass chord. So that's really important to help you, I think, get used to the tricks of the composer's trade, if you like, and also the way chords typically like to behave. I should also say that instead of F minor 6, sometimes people here might play G flat diminished, F sharp diminished, which will also work. So it'd sound like this, F6 9, G flat diminished, leading to C, and everything else would say the same. But I prefer the minor. I think it's just a bit more intense. They both lead you back to C nicely, but it's personal preference, and you could use the diminished instead. But I just wanted to say that in case you see it and think, oh, well, why does one chart say G flat diminished and another say F minor or F minor 6? And they're very common different options for that point in the song. And finally, just notice there's no major 7s in this one. And on the 1 chord, the C6, when it comes in, the reason why, if you played a C major 7 against the first bar, the first melody note is a C. So you'll get this lovely sort of interval of a B and a C, which are very close together, get a bit of a clash. It's also common, or maybe more common in the swing era songs, to play 6 or 6/9 chords for chord 1 and chord 4. It's certainly what I prefer. And just the lesson really is don't always default to major 7. 6 or 6/9 are great options too, depending on the context. Now here's the chords for you played close up, slowly all the way through. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if you'd like to take your learning further with me, then please do check the description for a link to my Patreon page. I say it's all centered around learning jazz standards, tons of stuff all related to all of me on there and the other standards we've already covered. If you'd like to support me in other ways and say thank you, then there's the option to leave a donation on my website when you download the lesson resources. You can also use the YouTube thanks version. But finally, if you've got any questions about anything covered today, then please do leave a comment and I will get back to you to clarify anything. And thanks for watching, thanks for commenting. Jazz guitar lessons every Wednesday. Until next time, you take care.